Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. Hello, this is Salwa, one of the Women Techmakers Berlin co-organizers, and I'm introducing Dr. Rocío, who is a medical doctor who turned researcher and then turned an entrepreneur. Um, she she was working in genetic research and healthcare, and then she started working with people who are living with rare diseases. So she has decided to help them and dedicate her career to find solutions for people who are living with rare diseases. Therefore, she joined EF and co-founded a startup called Nostos Genomic that is working to use synthetic biology and artificial intelligence to help decipher genetic to help decipher rare diseases genomes and produce quick solutions for people who need customized medicines. So please welcome Dr. Rocío, who will tell you more now about her research and her career and how she got to co-found the company and become the CTO of it. Dr. Rocío?
Hi, can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So I don't have slides, so it's just me, but I hope we can make this work out. So yeah, so thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy and I'm really honored for the invitation to speak today. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Rocío. I'm originally half Spanish, half Mexican. And even though this is not what I originally set out to do when I came to Berlin 2.5 years ago, I'm currently the CTO and the co-founder of a startup called Nostos Genomics. So my professional life has really not been a linear process of, I set out to do one thing and that's what I do up until the end. So when I was invited to speak, the guideline for this talk was to define what is my superpower. And after thinking about it for a few days, I think that my superpower is really this, the ability to nurture coincidences and to allow these coincidences to guide me to places that I didn't really know at the time I wanted to visit, and sometimes I didn't even really know that existed. So I want to start my story today by sharing the story of a man that I met more or less 10 years ago, and that has really stayed with me ever since. And this is a gentleman who at the time was in his late 60s, and he was telling us about what it was like to grow up as a child in the countryside in the Netherlands, where he was, normal kid, but just he was always really, really thirsty. And he would get into trouble because, he would get in trouble at school because he would be really thirsty and he would skip class, so he would go to a nearby river and drink some water. And his father, who was a really strict man, would punish him really severely, and he would beat him sometimes because he thought that this drinking so much water was just a way to draw attention to himself, and this complete nonsense that he wouldn't have. So as a child, this man would really go to the extreme lengths to be able to drink water. He would hide that he was drinking so much water to avoid getting into trouble. So as he grew up, he kept having a terrible relationship with his father until his father died. And, one day when he was in his 50s, he was just flipping through a magazine and he found an article about a disease called diabetes insipidus. And this is a disease where your kidneys aren't really able to recycle the water in your body well. So people who have this disease lose a lot of liquids, and therefore they need to drink a lot of water to be able to recover all this liquid. So, reading this, it was like, something all of a sudden clicked, and he's, this is me, this is what I have. And just out of really a stroke of luck, this man who'd spent his entire life, stigmatized as this eccentric, thirsty kid who really misbehaved, realized that what he actually had was a rare disease that no one had really recognized until then. And hearing this story, this might sound like completely incredible to you, but this kind of stories are actually really not that unusual for people who live with a rare disease. So you may have never heard about rare diseases, or, you know, the name itself, rare, might suggest that, you know, it's some rare, obscure disorder that doesn't really affect a lot of people. But the thing is that even though they're individually rare, collectively, these diseases affect about 300 million people in the world who live with these rare diseases that are often caused by changes or by mutations in their DNA. Now, because each individual disorder is rare, people who have these diseases really face a lot of challenges. So I told you the story about this gentleman, and just like him, a lot of people will really struggle to find out what is the name of the disease that they have. And on average, it takes between 5 and 8 years from the very first symptoms until the moment that you get an answer, you know, a diagnosis of this is your disease. Now, other people will get diagnosed with diseases that are also really, really rare, and that maybe we only know of 10 other people in the world who have this specific disease. And for many of them, this means that we don't know anything about the disease, we don't know how to treat it, and there's essentially no treatment available. So I think people who live with rare diseases really share a lot of these complex problems, and they have experiences that I personally really empathize with. But this is not where I started. I wasn't always like a rare disease researcher. At the origin, I started out as a medical doctor back in Mexico, which is where I was living with my family then. So at this time, I was a medical student. I was really enjoying medicine. I loved working with patients. And then something that I started noticing a lot, the more I was involved in clinical practice, is that there were really like a lot of people who would come to the doctor and who would have problems that just didn't really have an easy answer, you know? And maybe some of these questions are familiar to you, but it would be questions like, why do I have these symptoms? You know, what disease do I have? What should I do about them? What treatment options do I have available? And what happens if the treatment doesn't really work? And you know, through living these experiences, I was just really becoming more and more frustrated because the answer would often just be, you know, we don't know, we don't know. And then the patient would be sent back home with just like a lot of unanswered questions. And I found this, you know, extremely frustrating. And at the time I decided, you know, I'm not going to be one of these doctors who don't have answers. I'm going to go and find answers out there. So I decided to leave clinical medicine and go into research. And I somehow convinced a professor at the university in Mexico to please take me as a student in his lab, which the first year was completely catastrophic because I had never been in a lab before. I had no idea what I was doing. But then after some time, you know, I became better at it. And in the end, after a year of work, I got to present my work at a conference. And for me, this conference was really, I think I had the single most decisive beer of my life, because I sat at an empty chair that I saw there at the conference, and I started speaking with the person who was sitting next to me. And this ended up actually being a professor that was working at a university in the Netherlands, and he was actually involved in recruiting foreign students for a master's program. So I saw this as a fantastic opportunity. I just like jumped on it. I insisted that we exchange contact information. And as soon as I arrived back home, I sent him all my documents. I applied for the master's program. I was accepted. I got a scholarship. I packed my bags and I moved to the Netherlands, to the city that I had never heard about before. And back at the time, just like barely had any information on the Wikipedia article. So, I mean, retrospectively, incredibly, it ended up being actually one of the best things that I've ever done. You know, a lot of very good things sort of fell into place for me at that time. So, because when I arrived, I learned that at the university, there was a department of genetics, and they were starting to use this really exciting new technology called next generation sequencing, or NGS for short. And what this technology allows you is that essentially scientists could read a person's entire genome, like all of the DNA that you could find in a person, and that makes you really uniquely you. So at the time, I think everyone realized, wow, this is super powerful. This is really a promising technology for diagnostics, and also retrospectively. I can really see that this, the advent of NGS has been really transformative for the field. It's really like revolutionized how we think of some diseases, how we diagnose some diseases, even how we treat some diseases. But at the time, I was just really, in pure awe, thinking, oh, this is such a cool technology. And it seemed so science fiction-like that it was something that I really wanted to take part in. So about 1 month after I arrived to the Netherlands, I approached the researcher who was actually working on this, and I talked him into letting me do an internship at his lab, which he accepted. And this internship went well because I was no longer as catastrophic in the lab as I used to be. So I ended up doing a PhD there, and I was working at the time on what I thought was just the most exciting thing that I could possibly be working on. And this is how I actually got into rare diseases. Because the really cool thing is that thanks to NGS, now for the first time, we could really find mutations that are causing rare diseases, even though we don't really understand the disease, even if we don't know anything about the disease, or even if we just know that there's 10 patients out there who have this specific disease. So this was really, really powerful and really promising. And I spent the next few years then just reading through people's DNA, looking through thousands of mutations, and mutations are essentially just differences in DNA, and trying to understand which of these mutations are causing disease and which ones are just like harmless changes that are happening in the background. Because in genomics, this is exactly the challenge that you have in genomics and healthcare specifically, that if you would sequence, my DNA, or we would sequence your DNA, we would find millions of differences between both sets of DNA. And we currently just understand so little about our genome that it's really impossible right now to know which ones are the ones that are meaningful to our health, which ones are, going to make you more prone to have a disease, or, to be more prone to have diabetes, or, heart diseases, or which ones can cause indeed like a rare disease, like the patient, for instance, that I mentioned at the beginning. So it's hard to know what makes those mutations unique and what makes other mutations just sit quietly in the background and not really have an effect on our health. So I was really, I was involved in several different projects, but most of my work really focused over the course of 5 years in trying to understand how mutations in some genes cause specific diseases in children. So often these would be really rare diseases, where there was only 20, 30, 50 children in the world known to have this disease. And what started happening is that a lot of families who had a child who was just diagnosed with one of these diseases would start reaching out to the doctors and the researchers who were working at our center and who were specialists in this disease. So what would happen is that these families would have a child, and the child would be sick, and they would receive a diagnosis from the doctor, but then they would be left with a lot of unanswered questions, because at the time, perhaps just not a lot was known about the disease. So these parents would then reach out to us, hoping that they could receive more information and that this could help guide, the treatment of their child. So we started often emailing back and forth with some of the parents, and really over the years, we exchanged a lot of emails, a lot of information. And this has, for me personally, led to a lot of really fantastic opportunities. So for instance, in one occasion, I was contacted by the mother of a child who'd just been diagnosed with a rare disorder that we only knew of 10 patients in the world at the time. And I really, this is a person that I really admire a lot. She'd struggle a lot for many years to get a diagnosis for her child. And, she managed to get this in the end out of just sheer determination. And when she did, she realized that there was just no information and no support available out there. So she decided that since there was nothing out there, what she was going to do was to create an organization that would provide all this information and, really pave a way to developing a treatment for her child. And so she had reached out to me because she wanted to know whether I would be interested in being a scientific advisor for them and, supporting them along the way. And I was like, yes, of course I want to, I want to be part of this. This is the reason that I came here to do this, to help patients, find these answers. But just at the same time, I had to say that I was really incredibly skeptical that this would ever work, because it seemed like such an ambitious goal. It seemed like something that was so far away, you know, to develop a treatment for a disease that we just know nothing of, that there's only 10 patients out there. You know, how are we even going to get there? And I have to say that in this sense, the rare disease community is really a fantastic community. It's a really a group of people who are just, you know, incredibly giving, incredibly driven. And this involves, you know, people who have rare diseases. It involves their families, healthcare professionals, scientists, all sorts of other people who are just really joining forces to tackle these really incredibly challenging problems that need, you know, knowledge and expertise from all sides, and really all hands on deck. So despite how skeptical I was at the beginning, I have to say that, you know, I'm really proud to say after 2 years that I was wrong, and that within this patient organization, we are now in a position where we really have a sensible path to treatment, you know. Every year, the organization is giving out grants. It's giving out funding that is allowing to develop, you know, disease models to understand better the disease in itself. It's giving out funding to test candidate drugs. And this is really mostly because of the work of the parents who've been involved in the organization, because they're just really, you know, really driven, really motivated. But for me personally, I have to say that I'm just really grateful to have been invited on this incredible and really improbable journey, because I've really learned a lot from them. But for me personally also, this contact with you know, parents of children who have rare disease and with the community itself has been really rewarding as well. Because it was, in the end, it was the mother of a child with rare disease who gave me, you know, a really good push that sent me on my own journey to found Nostos Genomics. So this was, will be 2 years ago now, and she invited me to a meeting in London. And the aim of the meeting was to discuss how to set up a study to also understand her child's disease. And I was really interested, so I eagerly accepted. Because at the time I had just moved to Berlin, and I was working on a project that was really, really interesting, but that I felt was, you know, moving me further and further away from patients. And this was something that I was struggling a lot with, and I was really trying to reconnect with the clinic. So we were, you know, in conversation, we talked about this, and she mentioned that she knew someone at an accelerator for startups and that she would be really happy to introduce me to her. And this person actually turned out to be Alice Bentic from Entrepreneur First, who I emailed, and she encouraged me to apply to the program, which I did without fully understanding what I was getting myself into. So I applied and I was accepted, and I resigned my postdoc position to join the program. And this is where I met my co-founder, David, because I think the slightly kind of unusual thing about Entrepreneur First is that it's accelerator that doesn't take companies, but rather just takes individuals, with this idea that, you know, people who have complementary skills will find each other and find a problem that is really interesting and that they want to found a company to try to kind of like solve or tackle. So David and I just, you know, we started talking, we had a really good click, and we decided to start working together on the first day of the program. Which is something that I'm really grateful for, because I think otherwise we just would have never met each other, because we're just really different people. But what I appreciate about this is that because we're very different people, I really learn from him every day, and I really, really respect him a lot. And I'm just really happy for that development. So the problem that we're working on goes all the way back to the story that I shared at the beginning, which is this diagnosing rare diseases. And the reason for this is that to be able to treat a sick person, I mean, the first thing that you need to know is what disease you have. And this is a huge issue, because right now, the best way that we can diagnose people who have rare diseases is with a genetic test. And currently, only about 1/3 of all people who do a genetic test will get a clear result, which means that more than half of them will just have no clear answer or no answer at all. And then, as I've mentioned before, the challenge here is really in finding, you know, among the millions of mutations that we all carry in our DNA, which ones are the ones that are making a person sick. So there's this metaphor always of, you know, it's like a needle in finding a needle in a haystack. But some people have actually said that it's more like finding a needle in a stack of needles. So it's just really this huge challenge, because our genome is incredibly vast. We don't understand fully how it works, and we really need a good framework to understand, this relationship between changes in our DNA and changes in our health. And this is exactly what we're doing at the company with Nostos Genomics. So we're bringing together an interdisciplinary team to combine artificial intelligence and synthetic biology to start building a map to understand, this relationship between our DNA and our diseases. So for me, this is really probably the most exciting work I've done in my life, and not just because it's my company, so it feels like my baby, but really because at this point, all the pieces are really coming together, because all these sort of sharp turns that I've taken, all these side quests I've gone, they're really converging right now to bring me into a place that I'm really lucky to work with wonderful people. I'm building something that I think is really, scientifically cutting edge, and that I'm really hopeful that this is something I can help bring a lot of answers that are really needed for a lot of people out there. So now that I'm, approaching the end, I just want to wrap up with some sort of condensed thoughts on how these superpowers have kind of helped me push my career forward. And I have mainly 2 points. So the first one is serendipity. I think I'm a very lucky person, and I really think that it's amazing when coincidences happen. But I think that the magic really happens when you take advantage of these coincidences and you see them as an opportunity to connect and to turn them into something meaningful. Because ultimately, we don't really have a lot of control over the probability of something that is external to us happening, but we do have control over being, prepared to react to it and prepared to take some chances on it. So, they say that fortune favors the strong. I like to think that fortune favors the prepared. So preparation is everything. And the second point that I think is also really important is synergy. And I think this is because some problems are just really too big to be tackled alone. And especially when you're talking about complex problems, I mean, there's just no room for big egos. So some people just need a lot of people, some projects, just need like a lot of people to come together and to collaborate. And even though it's, a little bit cliche sometimes, I do think that the result of this kind of collaboration is really often greater than the sum of its parts. So, it's always good to go out there and find people that you can connect with, see if you can help them along the way. Sometimes you'll get to contribute to, these wonderful results that you didn't even know were possible. And, sometimes if you're lucky, they'll also contribute to yours. So that's more or less what I wanted to share with you today. I think I've made it in time, so we should have some time for questions. I just have one slide that I want to share with my contact information. Let me see. So please feel free to reach out. Wait, because I cannot multitask. Can I do this? Yes, I can do this. No, well, this should work, more or less. So please feel free to reach out. God, guys. Super tech support here. Yes, so please feel free to reach out. There's my Twitter handle, that's my email. Also via LinkedIn, you can find me. So, if there's anything on your mind that you'd like to talk about, I'm always happy to chat. And as a sort of like public service announcement, we're currently hiring for a position as a software developer and a data science intern. So if that sounds like you, just please send me a message and let's take it from there. Great. That's it for me. Yes. I can't hear. I'm just going to sit here awkwardly. I can't hear you, Sawa. So I have a.
Okay.
There, great.
Yeah, we are still figuring out the mute and mute thing. Okay, thank you so much for this fantastic talk, and it's a quite exceptional journey that you have made until this point. So I think we can now take a few questions. I'm looking at the chat. I cannot see any question actually. Sorry, question. Okay, so that's from Anna. So that's from Anna. What was the question? Did you have a chance to play with Folded? This is the question.
Yes, so we haven't managed to play with a lot of algorithms or programs that are out there. We spent the last year essentially building our minimum MVP. So now we have it, you know, it works, and now we're going to start integrating layers on top of that. So yeah, definitely things like Folded are something that we have in mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I do have another question that's something I'm quite interested in, so I would ask it. So you are building a technology, like essentially biotech, and you probably are targeting or probably are aiming to collaborate with the big players in the industry in terms of pharmaceutical companies and other health tech companies that are also setting up their technologies to decipher genomes of rare diseases. What is the like the minimum standard of having an MVP that works, that could be rolled in the market, and what are the kind of regulations that you are dealing with right now?
Yeah, oh, that's a complex question. Yeah, so there are, I mean, genomics is a really sort of like hot area right now, and there's a lot of competitors, if you will, that have already platforms that work quite well. So of course it's difficult to, you know, bring something new to the table because there, you know, it's feels sometimes like it's quite full. What we are building now as an MVP is what we call, it's a platform that is a variant interpreter. So this is you know, an algorithm that can look at mutations and tell whether they cause disease or not. But what we think is, you know, and what we have right now is really working for all coding regions of the genome. Don't know if this is like a very technical answer, but what we're doing is starting to incorporate this data from experiments into it, which is what is really innovative and that other companies are not currently doing. So that's in terms of kind of like where is the entry. And in terms of regulation, because of the approach, so we do not deal directly with patient samples. So because currently in the healthcare system, these patients have to go through the medical sort of like pipeline. You know, they go to the doctor takes a sample, sends it to a lab. So we work directly with genetic testing labs. And because of this sort of layer between us and the patients, we fall under in vitro device regulation, which is a little bit more lax than for typical medical devices.
Okay, interesting. I will see if there is another question from the audience. No, but we do have like 1 or 2 minutes. So probably if I can ask another question, because this is very interesting. So I wanted to ask, what is the biggest challenge in the sphere of biotechnology in terms of introducing something that patients would be willing to deal with or would probably trust? What is the component of trust here?
What is the component of trust? I mean, I have to say patients are, as I mentioned, you know, the rare disease community is really eager, is very, you know, they just want answers, they want treatments, they want diagnosis. So anything that can get them closer to where they have to go, you know, closer to this treatment endpoint, they're very willing to engage with. I think it's perhaps rather on the medical side that you have more skepticism. Well, skepticism is not a nice word, but you know, people are a bit more conservative about it. And this is actually what we think is also good about what we're doing, that we are creating sort of like tangible evidence to help, you know, understand how, you know, the consequences at the molecular level of specific mutations. And just the approach that we use in terms of artificial intelligence also allows us to give a measure of, you know, how much do we trust this result, and allows people to sort of, the users to look into the classifications that we've done to try to understand what was, you know, the evidence that contributed to this. You know, why did the algorithm predict this specific thing? So we know that trust is really important for diagnostics, and we're really, in what we're building, we're trying to target this specifically.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for this fantastic talk.
Thank you.
If you could be available on the Slack channel, that is IWD 2020. If the audience have more questions, they can just ask it there. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you.